Tailwind CSS was sort of born by accident as sort of a byproduct of another project that I was working on. So Steve Shoger, who's actually my business partner in Tailwind Labs, me and him have been buddies for years and years and years, hacking on little side projects and stuff together, actually introduced to each other by a friend of mine that I met in college. And one day in one of our sort of just hangouts at Starbucks, we were brainstorming on side project ideas. I was telling him about this idea I had for an app that the goal was sort of like help you share interesting articles with other people on your team. And he thought it was a really cool idea. So I decided I was going to take a week off work, just a week of vacation, to try and like prototype this and have some fun with it. And the first thing that I did was try and figure out how I was gonna kind of do all the styling and build out the actual site. And up until then, I'd always been using Bootstrap for everything, and I was a huge fan of Bootstrap and loved Bootstrap, but the version of Bootstrap that had just come out at the time, which I think was Bootstrap 4, they switched everything over to Sass, and they were using Less before. And I just like dogmatically loved Less, and I didn't want to stop using Less. I really liked Less as a CSS preprocessor. So I thought, well, if I want to keep using Less, then I have to write the CSS myself. So I just tried to figure out a way to sort of structure everything in a way that made sense to me. And it was kind of pretty Bootstrap inspired at the time. You know, there was like button classes and card classes and stuff like that. That was very sort of specific to the design of this project. But over time, I also found myself introducing these little utility classes for adding a little bit of padding here, a little bit of margin, or centering some text, or kind of turning something into a Flexbox container and stuff like that. And that project didn't end up going anywhere, like all side projects do. It just went to the side project graveyard. But on the next kind of side project, which was this this sort of checkout as a service tool called Kitetail that me and Steve were trying to build, I needed to start somewhere with the styles on that too. So the first thing that I did is I went over to the project that we were working on before, which was called Digest, and I just grabbed all the style sheets and pasted them into this new project to use as a starting point, and started deleting the stuff that didn't make sense, keeping the stuff that did. And what I found every time I sort of was bringing this like collection of style sheets from project to project is that the only thing that always like survived, that was always the same from project to project, was these little utilities for things like margin and padding and Flexbox, like these really low level things that weren't doing opinionated things like saying what a button should look like or what a card should look like. And what I was doing with this Kitetail project is I was live streaming all of my work on it on Twitch and YouTube. And you know, I'd get like 100 people watching or whatever, and I'd just be building it. And the way I sort of pitched the live streams was like, come watch me TDD a Laravel app and do some cool stuff with Vue and Laravel and whatever. Didn't think twice about sort of the CSS side of things. I just kind of was doing what I was doing, and I didn't see that as like the exciting or interesting part. And inevitably what happened is that during these live streams, everyone was always asking me like, what CSS framework is this? What CSS framework is this? What is this approach to styling? I've never seen this before. And that kind of encouraged me to do a little bit more with it and to think about open sourcing it. So around the same time, a friend of mine, Jonathan Renink, who I now work with at Tailwind Labs, was about to do a big redesign of his SaaS product that he was working on. And he said to me, what is this like utility CSS stuff that you've been doing? I want to try it out on this app. And this was right at the same time that I was trying to take the CSS stuff that I've been doing and sort of extract it into a library that I could actually release. So that's kind of where things started in terms of actually turning it into something that could be reused, because he was trying to use those style sheets to build his app. I was trying to use them to build my app. And that was like a forcing function for making sure that it could be used in like two totally different contexts and support two totally different looking applications. And that sort of drove out like, what do we need to make customizable? What do we need to include out of the box? All that sort of stuff. What is like too high of a level of abstraction? What's the right level of abstraction? So we kind of hacked on that and kind of fine-tuned it. And we decided to sort of open source it. And I was trying to think of a name for it. And at the time, my focus was still this Kitetail app. Like, that's what I thought my future was going to be. I thought we're going to build this app, we're going to try and grow it, turn it into a real thing. So I thought, I want to open source this under the sort of Kitetail brand. And I was trying to think, what's a cool name, like kite tail? Maybe I could start with tail. Tail what? Tailwind. That's a cool name. That kind of makes sense because it's kind of helping you do stuff faster. And that was like the first name that I came up with. And I thought, man, this is like a really good name for a CSS framework. So that's where that kind of came from. And we kind of kept riffing on it and improving it until it was ready to sort of open source and release in sort of a v0.1.0 state. Originally it was like all built with less, like I kind of was saying, right? The whole motivation for even doing this whole thing was that I wanted to write all my CSS with less instead of Sass. But as the framework got more and more complicated and we needed to support all these customization use cases, it just became unmaintainable because like less is, it's not designed to be used in that way. Like I was doing things with it that I don't think the creators of the tool ever intended to work. They just like worked by coincidence. And if I ever told them that I was doing it, they would have said, please don't do that. And that'll probably break in a minor update or a patch release one day without us even realizing. So when I was kind of trying to figure out like, man, how do we like make this more maintainable? Like I feel like I can't even write tests for this thing, and it's terrifying me because there's no less testing framework. Like doesn't even make sense, you know, because no one was doing anything sophisticated with it. So around this time, David Hemphill, who is also a really well-known person in the Laravel community, mentioned to me I should try building it with PostCSS, which is like a tool for parsing CSS into an abstract syntax tree and sort of manipulating that AST and then kind of regenerating the CSS based on the manipulated AST. And I didn't really understand how I could use that to build this tool, but David had seen a bunch of cool things that people were doing with it, and he kind of helped me understand what was possible in terms of like, okay, well, what you want to do is you want to create custom @ rules that when you're walking the AST, you can see, oh, there's an @tailwind rule. Like, let's generate a bunch of CSS with JavaScript, remove that rule, and put in your custom generated CSS. And I was like, oh man, I'm starting to really see how I could use this to build like a CSS framework. So he really helped me kind of get started and learn how all that stuff worked, and ended up becoming really involved in the early days of the project, helping us kind of get that stuff out the door. So it was probably like a month before we ended up actually releasing it, but we scrapped all the stuff that we wrote with less, and I rewrote the entire thing with PostCSS in like 2 days. Then we just kept iterating on it, and then I think it was like Halloween night 2017 we released the very first version of it. And since then it's just kind of grown like crazy, faster and faster. And at this point, almost every new website I end up seeing on the internet is built with Tailwind, which is completely crazy to me.